Today I'm just going to talk about some of the design thoughts that go into some of my pieces of lace, and I'm going to talk about how I developed this Swimathon design in 2020. Since then it has evolved into several pieces of lace for bobbin lace, the most recent ones being for Bucks Point and recently finished a Bedfordshire design. I came up with the idea while I was actually doing some swim training for Swimathon in 2020 when I was aiming to do a 5k swim for the first time. 5k, for those of you who don't know swimming, is 200 lengths of a 25 metre pool. And while I was training for it, I came up with the idea of this piece of lace. I went home and I promptly put down a very, very rough sketch onto a piece of paper with the idea I got in my head. I then took it through into the computer, which is where I do most of my designs on, using a program called Lace 8, and came up with this design. Now initially it was a little bit bigger than it ended up being. I started trying to try out different threads for it and different ideas for it, and this was the first sample that I made. It was quite a wide piece, and initially my thought was to make it into a bookmark, but this would make a very large bookmark, and so it evolved. The piece that it then became, which if I compare it with the original, you will see the difference in size. It became much slimmer. Now the main ideas behind this design is that you have a central wave moving through the water to create movement. You also have splashes within the water. You have little bubbles which are expelled air as you're swimming, and you also have a lane rope around the piece of lace. This gives you a nice edge, but also symbolises the lane ropes in the pool. On the actual piece of lace, I decided to use some of the pieces as cloth stitch and some as half stitch, and the half stitch was used on the lane ropes on the side. I also made sure I put the pins outside the gimp to symbolise the little knobbly bits on the lane ropes of the pool that I swim at, but it is just purely a symbolism of the water movement. From this piece of lace, I recently needed to make a small piece of lace, and I developed a little coaster design. This one, again, I took the little bits of water movement, I incorporated a coloured worker as before and put in white to produce a little bit more movement and a little bit of a symbolism of the lane ropes around the outside. So that one developed from it. The most recent ones, this is the most recent Bedfordshire one that has also developed. This is for this year's Swimathon 2022. I returned to swimming after many years' break from competition for Swimathon and for fitness, and I recently got into doing tumble turns again. This motif symbolises the experience of tumble turns, where the movement of the tiles at the bottom of the pool, symbolised by the ground, is not straight as you turn over. You're going around in a circle. You're expelling a lot of air to prevent the water going up your nose. And you also get the splashes over the edge of the pool as you do the tumble turn. This one hopefully will be a successful one to raise funds for the 2022 Swimathon challenge, which this year I'm undertaking the 30.9k challenge. So how do I go about designing? Well, I'm going to show you on a little bit of the approach that I take using flowers, because many of my designs incorporate flowers and have done through the ages. So I tend to look for a flower that I think will make a nice motif. This one is the one I'm going to use today, but I also look for flowers that are either in profile like this, rather than ones that are a little bit more complicated, or ones that are flat on looking at the camera, because these are much easier to work with. Now, many people say, I can't draw, so I can't design, but that's not the case. With a few simple steps, we can have you designing quite quickly, and very simple designs, which are often the most effective. So with this one, I would start off by tracing the outline. And I've done this one for you. I've traced off the outline. And we can see it's quite a nice simple flower. Not too difficult to work in it. Also, before I design, I very often decide what I want to make. So for this design, I'm going to make a round motif. I would then simplify this design, because at the moment that would be a very complicated piece. So I would trace it off again, and this time I would separate out the areas so that you have space between the areas. This will allow you straight away, you can see that these areas can be worked in cloth stitch or half stitch, and they are distinctly separate, and you would then pass pairs between them. Now also at this stage it's useful to decide which sort of lace you're going to design in, and generally most of my designs are in Buckinghamshire point ground lace or in Bedfordshire. At this stage it doesn't matter which one I choose to do, that will be affected by the grounds I'm going to put in it. So I quite like that design. I would then decide on the size of the motif, and I've put in a circle here, and that is quite a nice size circle, so I would then look at how the motif fits in it. And having drawn these on tracing paper, you can then decide whether you like it like that, or if you want to turn the design over. This one doesn't make a lot of difference, but I think it would be quite nice to maybe put two of these in, one at different heights, one higher and one lower. So now, having got two of these, I'm going to turn one of them over, and you can see then now you can play about with the shape, the size, positioning of these. Generally I would make these in slightly different sizes, so I could use a photocopier or a printer and reduce the scale of one of these designs, one of these tracings, to make it more like the original photograph where we had a large and a small. But we're still using the same tracing off. Now, as I say, I generally use a lace design program. All of this can be done in this, and it does make it quite a bit easier and quicker to actually do it. Once I've drawn out one of them, I can copy and paste it. It's slightly more difficult to reduce the size than drawing it on paper. So I've decided on the layout of it. You can change the angle, all sorts like that. What I would then do is to put another piece of tracing paper over the top and start dotting it. Once you've got them in the position you like, say we like that position, I will stick them down with sticky tape before we start tracing them off again. Now, for those of you continuing on the tracing paper, what I would do, if you haven't got access to grids, I would actually put a line of dots on a piece of paper, tracing paper, which I think you can just about see on here. I'm trying to do it over the white paper so you can see it. And I would have those alongside where I'm going to dot, so that I can compare them and dot on that piece of tracing paper, which I'm now going to put over the top of it. I'd stick this one down as well, and I could keep that there, and I would literally dot this line. Now I'm doing it by eye. If I was doing it again, I would be doing it in the computer, so it would make it a little bit more accurate. I would pick the spacing of the dots, doing it by hand, of the thread that I know I want to use for this piece of lace. So this spacing I'm doing here would be for Finca 60. As it's from a design I've worked in Finca 60 and I know it works quite well. Now sometimes when you've dotted it you do need to change things, but that would then need tracing off yet again. It's a lot of time consuming work to do designs, something that a lot of people don't realise when they're buying cheap patterns or photocopying them. And I'm doing this quite quickly for the video. If I was doing it by hand I would be taking a little bit more care over it because it is quite critical. And I would go around all of the shapes and before I went on to the next stage. But you can see the effect of that now coming along quite nicely. The next stage will be to do the outside line, and again I would dot the line and decide whether I wanted the inside of the trail either inside this ring or outside, depending whether the design fitted nicely. I would then decide what ground I was going to put in it. Now, a lot of the designs I use quite an irregular ground where I put the plaits in where I know needs to feed the motif if I'm working in Bedfordshire. The Swimathon ones in particular I used an irregular ground for. And for something like this I actually put little circles in and then dotted them, which you can do on the stage where you have the motifs. You can put them in there, or you can put them in at the later stage. If you were putting them in but weren't sure about it when you traced off all this outline, I would do them in pencil first and then dot them. Whenever I'm dotting, I am dotting using the pen. It's 0.1mm waterproof pen, because I want the dots to be nice and crisp. If you do them in pencil, they become much larger. You have to scrub around in a little circle to get a dot, and it doesn't become as crisp. The main decision is what ground is going to suit. Now, as you can see, the difference between the ground with the Swimathon ones, this one is a regular ground and the original one is a random ground. There are lots of different grounds you can use. Obviously if you're doing it in Bucks Point you would use probably a point ground with tallies, picots, lots of different things you can put in there. But that's the basics of how I go about doing a design. From flowers I'll go out and take photographs, so they're all my work. But look for flowers that are either very recognisable in a side profile or the flower facing the camera completely flat on. It's much more difficult to do them, particularly when you're first learning about design, if they're not in a recognisable form. And a very complicated double flower is much harder to design from. So pick a nice flower, nice straightforward flower, perhaps one with multiple petals to get you started, and have a go. Trace it off and see what you can come up with. I look forward to hearing your comments, seeing your replies, and let me know if there's anything else you'd like to see on videos. Subscribe, click the notifications button and you'll hear of all new videos coming soon. Thanks for watching.